Accidentally, I became a horned prostitute crying, painful, suddenly realizing, alive, everything is possible. She grabbed the only life-saving straw and regarded him as heaven. He is her only one. Okay, she's not his only one. What should we do? Family is the only support, supporting her efforts to survive. Suddenly discovered that the culprit who killed both parents was actually in this Marquis' mansion. You made me lose both parents, how about you taste this too? The path of revenge is so difficult. See how she defeats the bull ghosts and snake gods, step by step wielding power. Chapter 1. Reunion. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At the time of the Yuan Shao, filled round balls made of glutinous rice. Flour for Lantern Festival, Chun'er finally waits for the banquet. Lingyue. Chun'er's pipa covers his face, he hesitates to speak, his eyes filled with tears. In Lingyue's eyes, he almost felt heartbroken to death. He picked her up and, in front of everyone, took her away from the Shadow Moon Tower. Behind her, the madam pointed her throat and shouted, "Lord Ho, this." Chun'er didn't hear any sound from behind, probably someone stopped him. Upon returning to the mansion, he passionately kissed her and murmured, "I never thought you were so close to me." Chun'er was suffocated by his kiss, tears streaming down his cheeks and lips. Finally, he noticed her and gently released her, wiping her away. Chun'er nestled in his arms, thinking that he would be her reliance in the future. In fact, after the incident, she had been looking forward to him, thinking of him, and thinking of him. He said, "I'll have the maid help you wash up later, take you to see your mother tomorrow, and then marry you." His words made Chun'er warm. She lifted her small face, her eyes full of him. Twisting a handkerchief in his hand, he hesitated and said, "Brother Yun, I've been in the Shadow Moon Tower before, and I'm afraid the old lady won't be able to." Lingyue gently pressed her lips and said, "I'm not afraid. Speaking of which, I feel a bit sorry for you. I originally wanted to marry you as the main wife, but he paused for a moment. Due to helplessness, I have now married Yao Ji, the daughter of the Yao family." Chun'er's heart hurt a little. In fact, she had already learned the news from her father. My mother comforted her and said, "What's the solution? Men always have 3 wives and 4 concubines. Yes, even if my father is just a 7th-rank official, she still has 2 aunts." She cried all night lying on her mother's lap that day, but could do nothing. Besides, he is her only reliance at the moment. Thinking of this, she tightly hugged Lingyue's waist and said, "As long as Brother Yun has me in his heart, that's all." Lingyue was somewhat moved and said, "I have you in my heart." Chun'er nodded heavily, full of trust. Lingyue placed her on the bed and called out at the door. A little maid came in, tied in a bun, and knelt down on the ground. "Servant Xiaowan, I'm new to the mansion today." Lingyue frowned and said, "No, change your name." Chun'er took a small step to Lingyue's side and shyly said, "Brother Yun, go ahead and get busy. It's not too late to change your name in the future. I really need to go and remove the dullness." He tugged at the thin veil on his body, and his tender white skin was faintly visible. Lingyue's throat was dry, and he said, "I'll come back later," before leaving. Chun'er looked at Lingyue's reaction and thought, "As long as he is interested in me, that's good." Chun'er looks down on herself a bit. How could she have hoped for everything like this before with just one person? Now, it has to be like this. After all, my father died tragically, my mother committed suicide, my 2 young brothers were nowhere to be found, and my whole family consisted of over 20 people. They were exiled and sold. It took me a lot of effort from the boss to arrive at the Marquis' mansion. She sighed lightly and said lightly, "Miss Xiaowan, help me fetch some water. I want to take a shower." Xiaowan was nimble and nodded in agreement, then quickly ran out. A mother happened to come in at the entrance of the courtyard and cursed sternly, "Little hoof, take it slow. Chun'er is a bit envious. She used to be so happy. She hasn't been so happy for a long time, and she's afraid she won't be able to be as happy in the future. In the future, she will have to live step by step in this mansion. The person introduced himself and said, "My surname is Wang, and I have been an old man in this mansion for over a decade. You can call me Wang Mama. Just now, the Marquis has instructed me to serve you closely." At first glance, it looked like old qualifications. In a few words, he explained his qualifications clearly and even moved out the Marquis. Chun'er didn't really like her, but he didn't show it either. She bent her legs and smiled, "Hello, Mom Wang. I just entered the mansion today, please ask Mom Wang to be more careful." Speaking, he took off a jade bracelet from his wrist and handed it to her. "This is a little bit of my heart. I hope Mama Wang will accept it. I will rely on Mama Wang in the future." Wang's mother immediately smiled and said, "Master, don't worry, I should think more about you. I won't worry about you like that little hoof just now. Miss, this is the Marquis's main bedroom, located in the same courtyard as the study. I'm afraid the girl will have to move to another courtyard in the future." Chun'er didn't understand her meaning and regretfully said, "Yes. Old slave, go outside to get some information and come back to the girl, okay?" Wang Mama felt a bit proud. Chun'er finally understood what she had said earlier and exclaimed in surprise, "Thank you, Mom Wang. You have a heart." Mom Wang nodded and stepped back. The Marquis's mansion is indeed as deep as water, even an old lady has to deal with it with care. Chapter 2. Memories. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Quickly, Xiaowan walked in lightly and said in a tender voice, "Miss, the water is ready." Chun'er has an inexplicable fondness for her. She smiled and walked up to pick up Xiaowan's arm with her hand, sweetly saying, "We really have a fate. My name also has the character, Guan, which means, Guan, with a smile, which is your name." Xiaowan shook her head and weakly said, "Miss Hui, I can't read." Chun'er stroked her hand and said, "Don't worry, let's settle down in the future. I'll teach you how to read, okay?" Xiaowan nodded heavily, her eyes full of agreement. Chun'er sat in the smoke-filled bathtub. Outside the window it was already late at night. Warm water makes people tired, and Chun'er sleeps vaguely against the barrel wall. The experience of Lingyue Tower reappears before my eyes. Old Master Wu's wrinkled face and an old-fashioned and deep voice. "Rui, Rui, you really make me Rui. This piece of music is gentle and beautiful, very pleasing to my taste." Chun'er doesn't like the name Rui very much. It was given by the brothel lady of Lingyue Tower, with a strong sense of dust and wind. I also don't like the person Wu Leotefu. Although he is a role model, he often goes in and out of Lingyue Tower. But she had to deal with it, because he was not only a grand tutor, but also a teacher for the young Marquis of the Yen Mansion. Yen Lingyue had served as a crown prince accompanying him for several years when he was young. After learning about this from Sister Yuelian, she was overjoyed. Sister Yuelian was a famous Jiu flower in Lingyue Tower in her early years, but men have always been fond of the new and dislike the old. Nowadays, Sister Yuelian only relies on a few old customers to make a living in Lingyue building. Sister Yuelian said that Yen Xiaoho was too stubborn and was accused by him of being unable to accompany the emperor. Yen Laoho had no choice but to seek a different path. However, even so, she must seize this opportunity tightly. She found it difficult to find anyone else who had an intersection with Yen Lingyue, and Old Master Wu was her only hope. So, she often endured discomfort and let him hold her in his arms, teaching her how to play the pipa, while her restless hands rubbed against her back. She still pretended to be ignorant, played for a moment, and asked him, "Is that right?" Old Master Wu laughed heartily and said, "You can be taught. Miss Rui is really a wonderful person." She stood up and saluted, "Thank you for your praise." Mr. Wu reached out to support her arm and forcefully pinched her waist. Changguan's smile did not diminish as he pointed to the pipa and said in a coquettish voice, "Sir, will you teach me how to play this again?" "Okay, okay." He hugged her shoulder and taught hand in hand. Changguan cursed in his heart, old pervert. Not showing a trace on the surface. Thanks to her mother's hard practice of playing the pipa from a young age, she was able to enter the Shadow Moon Tower and pursue a career in art, otherwise, she could only have sex every day like Sister Yuelian. Changguan showed great patience with old Master Wu and repeatedly insinuated that he only wanted to play good music for his close friends. Therefore, several times, he secretly made an agreement with the madam, willing to pay a high fee, so that Rui could only play for her. So, no matter what little gesture Wu Lao Tai Fu made, she always tried to compromise because she was waiting for Yan Lingyue, waiting for Wu Lao Tai Fu to unintentionally mention herself to Yan Lingyue. She repeatedly played the piece called Chongqing in front of old Master Wu. She once took the initiative to play for Yan Lingyue. Yan Lingyue was full of her and said, "This is the best piece of music in the world. In the future, I think you can play it for me every day." She didn't understand at the time and smiled, "No problem, as long as you want to listen, I will play it." Yan Lingyue scraped her nose bridge and said, "Silly girl." She stuck out her tongue and said, "I'm not stupid." Later, when I talked to my mother, she smiled and said, "Silly child, this young Marquis is probably pleased with you." Changguan only realized later that she felt a bit uncomfortable when we got to know each other again. With this in mind, Changguan washed his face with water. In the Shadow Moon Tower, she had been eagerly anticipating that one day, this piece of music might be heard by him again. Sure enough, when old Master Wu finished his New Year's Eve, he leaned against the Grand Tutor's chair in Yejian. "Rui, play Chongqing again." Changguan's knees should bend down. At the end of the song, old Master Wu said regretfully, "Rui, only you can play this music directly into the hearts of the people. I also taught the music girl to play this music in the mansion, but I was always disorganized. When performing the day before yesterday, the boy Yan Lingchen laughed at me." Changguan was startled in his heart, appearing faint on the surface, waiting for old Master Wu to continue speaking. "He used to be my student. Perhaps last year when the old Marquis passed away, he suddenly became more sensible and went to visit me the day before yesterday. I asked him to enjoy music and eat, but this stinky guy shook his head and kept saying he had heard something even better. I immediately took a picture of the table and asked him to come to the Shadow Moon Tower to find Miss Rui when he had time. Her music was the best." Speaking of which, old Master Wu took a sip of water, moistened his throat, and continued, "I reckon he'll be coming to see you soon. He's been called into the palace again these days to practice swordsmanship with the Crown Prince. Your Highness praised me falsely, but I dare not take Rui for granted," Changguan said with a smile, feeling turbulent in his heart. She didn't expect that she would let him know about her so quickly. Before long, Changguan was surrounded by red gauze at the center of the stage of the Yuanshao, filled round balls made of glutinous rice. Flour for Lantern Festival. However, when Yan Lingyue, who was tall and tall, stepped onto the stage, the shadow that suddenly appeared completely covered Changguan. Changguan looked up and met his gaze, his deep eyes shining with water. Changguan's heart softened, and for a moment, he didn't want to look directly at him. His pipa gently covered his face. Old acquaintance appeared, and although Changguan had been looking forward to it for a long time, she did not expect to feel a heavy sense of shame in her heart. She was unwilling to reunite with him here, her chest heaving violently, and she was at a loss for a moment. Chapter 3. Exposure of Background. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Changguan closed his eyes, furrowed his brows slightly, and as he thought about these things, his eyes involuntarily shed tears. My father was also the county magistrate of Nanqing County in the border region, and I am considered the eldest daughter of an official family. Although my father does not like his mother as a worthless wife, he still dotes on his eldest daughter and has no worries about food and clothing. My father also had some political achievements, and the school was slightly improving. He received 2 commendations from the court. Somehow, the reputation of colluding with the enemy suddenly fell. A row of soldiers rushed into the mansion. Their father's head was in a different place, their mother died from hitting a pillar, and they hid behind the pillar trembling. The sharp voices of the 2 aunts kept on, and the younger brothers huddled together in tears, with Chun'er holding them in his arms. Before leaving, one of the white-faced men with an official appearance pinched his throat and asked, "Are you the eldest daughter Chun'er?" Chun'er looked at him with a cold expression and did not respond. When Lingyue found herself, she had been in Lingyue Tower for a year. Chun'er lay sideways on the edge of the bucket, sobbing softly. "Why are you crying?" In a low, hoarse voice. "Ah." Chun'er protected his chest and buried it in the water, revealing only one head. "When did Brother Yun come? Where is Shangqiyuan?" Lingyue pulled down the clothes next to her, easily pulled her out of the water, and wrapped her around her. She lay on her shoulder and sniffed, "It smells so good." He rubbed his nose against her ear, his heavy breathing becoming increasingly rapid. Chun'er couldn't bear it and kept retreating. Unexpectedly, he fell directly into the bathtub and pulled Lingyue together. The wet clothes made Chun'er's figure even more delicate and elegant. With her hair slightly lowered, she saw Lingyue's Adam's apple swallow twice before suddenly being heavily kissed. "Brother Yun, this is in the water." Chun'er couldn't speak clearly. "I know." I saw Lingyue turn over and jump, holding Chun'er and standing outside the bucket. The 2 of them were dripping like drowned chickens. Chun'er feels a bit amused. "Don't laugh," Lingyue whispered. He pushed his palm and the curtain fell. The hibiscus tent is warm, spending the night together. In the morning, seeing the blush on the mattress, although Chun'er was still deep asleep, Lingyue directly blocked her mouth until she woke up. Chun'er exclaimed, "Brother Yun." She said, but without looking up, she kissed her shoulder and neck directly. "Ah." Lingyue covered her hand. "After all, in the morning, keep your voice down," he said while busy. Having enough wine and food, Chun'er felt soreness in his waist and leg pain. Lingyue stood up and called for Shangqiyuan to come in to serve. After explaining a few words, he left first. "Pack up properly," Chun'er took a few deep breaths. Next, she is going to meet Yao Ji, the main wife of Lingyue. Although no one had taught her these things before, in the past, every aunt who came to our house had to meet her mother first. Thinking of these, her palms were slightly sweating, and she knew that not everyone was as kind to the side room as their mother. Yesterday's Mrs. Wang came again, gently supporting Chun'er's arm while whispering, "Miss, please come down to pay respects to Madam, and then you will go to see the old lady. Yesterday, I heard from Mrs. Zhang from Fangziju that Madam seems unhappy, so please be careful later." Chun'er turned to Wang's mother with a grateful smile. As soon as she entered the main hall, Yao Ji greeted her with a smile on her face. "Oh, she's such a perfect beauty. No wonder the Marquis has been longing for her." She caressed the back of Chun'er's hand while teasing Lingyue coquettishly. Lingyue was sitting in the main seat, feeling a bit embarrassed when she said something. "You guys talk, I'll go to my mother's place first." Perhaps afraid of being teased again, he didn't even look at Chun'er and left directly. Chun'er slightly bent his legs and lowered his head to greet him. "My younger sister doesn't need to be seen outside, come and sit here." Yao Ji warmly took her hand, which surprised Chun'er a bit. "My mother used to treat the side room with indifference and never enthusiasm." Chun'er was momentarily puzzled by the attitude of the wife-in-chief, but she dared not reveal it. As she dragged her inside, Yao Ji took out a pair of jade bracelets inlaid with gold and light green, and put them on Chun'er. "My younger sister will also be a member of the Marquis family in the future. I hope she can work together with me to serve the Marquis well." Chun'er lightly replied, "Madame Xie." She held Changquan's hand and gestured for the maidservants to leave the room and come to the main hall. She smiled and said, "There's no need to thank you between us. Marquis has already told me earlier." Changquan slowly lifted his head and looked at her. Changquan felt that although Yao Ji's smile was full, it did not reach her vision. Yao Ji continued, "In his early years, your father had a life-saving kindness to the old Marquis and also had teaching benefits to him." She took a sip of tea and her eyes darkened as she looked at Changquan. Changquan quickly lowered his head. "Would you be willing to be my legitimate wife and serve the Marquis?" Changquan immediately knelt down and said, "I dare not." Yao Ji laughed heartily, but did not lift Changquan up. "Sister, there's no need to be humble. If you're not willing, just follow the Lord's instructions and become the Lord's concubine." "Thank you, madam." Changquan will do his best according to madam's arrangements. Changquan was grateful for the experience of Lingyue Tower at the moment, where she learned to observe her words and expressions. Yao Ji then supported her arm and led towards the door. There are 6 courtyards in this Marquis' mansion. To the south is the old lady's peaceful residence, to the east is our Fangji residence, to the west is the Marquis' study and an empty Yashin pavilion, and to the north is the Tinjiakshuan and Shangqi garden. I plan on living in Yashin pavilion. How about my younger sister? Her gaze, without discussion, was only probing. Changquan immediately knelt down with fear and said, "I dare not." Yashin pavilion and study are adjacent, and even if they are empty, they cannot live in a side room. The Marquis was involved in important military affairs, with so many officials traveling between him. He only had a side room and lived there, afraid that he wouldn't survive for 10 days. "Sister, don't be nervous. Let's go to the old lady's place and see how she makes a decision." Yao Ji smiled and helped Changquan up, followed by several attendants and servants, and the group headed towards Ningyan residence in a grand manner. In Ningyan neighborhood, the sound of broken tea cups can be heard. Everyone stands still. Just about to report, stopped by Yao Ji. "Where did you come from? Where did you go?" "You are the young Marquis of the Banquet mansion, the head of the family. You brought a shadow moon tower, what kind of words?" An old voice trembled and said. "Mother, didn't I just tell you? She's a horned prostitute over there, still a perfect body." This was Yan Lingyun's voice. Changquan's face turned red, and his unbearable past was listened to by these servants. Yan Lingyun continued, "Besides, I have already fallen in love with her." "That's not enough, the Marquis' mansion won't allow it." Another shattered voice. Yao Ji smiled and whispered, "Sister, wait, I'll go persuade you. The old lady is getting old and her ideas are a bit rigid. Sister, don't worry." After speaking, Bian Langsheng walked into the room. "Marquis, have you made my mother angry again?" Chapter 4. Shangqiyuan. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In a moment, a maid came out to welcome Changquan. The old lady seemed to have a headache, and Yao Ji was kneading her temples behind her. The old lady looked up at Changquan, took Yao Ji's hand, and said softly to her, "Take a break." Yao Ji lowered her body and sat next to the old lady. The old lady and Yao Ji kept talking, as if Changquan was not there. Changquan lowered his head and dared not speak. After a while, Yan Lingyun spoke up and said, "Mother, Guaner is waiting for your instructions." The old lady glanced at Yan Lingyun, intending to get angry. Yao Ji leaned in her ear, whispering something in her ear. The old lady looked at Changquan sternly and said, "With your status, you are not allowed to enter the Marquis' mansion. Do you know?" Changquan's face turned red and he trembled as he replied, "I know." The old lady waved her hand and looked impatient. "Since Chun'er likes it, you can live in Shangqiyuan to the north." Changquan was not surprised, as it was indeed the most remote courtyard. The old lady gave a few more orders, to the effect of serving wholeheartedly and spreading branches and leaves for the Marquis' mansion as soon as possible. After speaking, he gave Chun'er a hairpin and Chun'er took it, which was considered beginner's level. Big red wedding attire, phoenix crown and rosy robe, Chun'er had no extravagant expectations. After leaving Lingyue residence, Chun'er followed Wang Mama all the way north. Wang's mother is like an unlocked chatterbox. Old lady, let me tell you something. I can't inquire about things in this mansion. Originally, I was responsible for kitchen procurement, but I'm getting older and my health isn't as good as before. I'm sorry, but now I'm doing some cleaning in the courtyard with the Marquis. Master, don't look down on me. After all, I have a long life and can do many things. In the future, I will serve you personally as instructed by the Marquis, and I will never disappoint you. As she approached Shangqiyuan, there was only one long corridor. Wang's mother rolled her eyes around and saw that there was no one around. There's something that the master must be interested in. Chun'er was somewhat surprised and stopped to look at her. I saw Wang's mother holding her hand and continuing forward, whispering, "This corridor, someone died a while ago." Chun'er let out a "yeah," and whispered, "Mom Wang." Before, when Lingyue left her house, she said, "Wait for me." At that time, my mother sighed and said, "Chun'er, his vast mansion is not something you can adapt to." Chun'er didn't take it seriously at the time, but now he suddenly heard about the death, which really surprised him. Wang's mother thought to herself and said, "It used to be a concubine of the Marquis, named Green Lotus. She took the initiative not to drink the elixir and became pregnant without realizing it. She was busy all day, but one day when she walked here, she fainted." Wang's mother exclaimed "tisk tisk" twice. When we invited the doctor, he said the fetal appearance was very poor. Within a few days, the fetus died in the womb and the person was gone. Chun'er was taken aback and said, "Mom Wang, it's a bit scary." Wang's mother waved her hand and smiled, "Look at me, you're a quick talker. Don't worry, Marquis, you must be blessed with so much love and care." Chun'er's palms were slightly sweating from fear, and he followed her into Shangqiyuan. Upon entering the courtyard, Chun'er was very satisfied. The yard is not big, but there is a pavilion in one corner. Next to the pavilion, there is an old weeping willow tree. The weather is cold, but its branches and vines have a green connotation. After all, it's the Marquis' mansion, with bright and clean windows inside. Chun'er asked unintentionally, "Mom Wang, is this room regularly cleaned?" Wang's mother immediately smiled and said, "Isn't that so? The corners of the Marquis' mansion are cleaned regularly." Her calloused hand casually touched the mahogany tabletop and said suspiciously, "It looks like this here. Maybe it was cleaned yesterday, right?" Chun'er looked at her expression and guessed a bit in his heart. Although she came from a small family, during her first few years as the eldest daughter, she truly enjoyed herself. Later, when her aunts entered the house and ate somersaults several times, she finally learned to be smarter. For example, Chun'er suspects that the cleanliness in front of him may be due to some people thinking that someone will definitely move into the Shangqiyuan garden in the next 2 days, which is why it happens to be cleaned. There are now 3 masters in this mansion, Lingyue, the old lady, and the wife of the main family. Yao Ji. Who exactly is it? Chun'er was somewhat lost in thought, staring out the window at the willow branches in a daze. "What are you thinking?" said Mrs. Wang. Chun'er regained his senses and smiled sweetly before asking, "Wang Mama, I was just thinking, this Shangqiyuan, will it be only you and me in the future? That would be too hard for you." "No way. Madame Yao has 4 maids, including Chi Mama brought from Yao Mansion, Zhu Mama given by the old lady after entering the mansion, and a small kitchen with several maids. With the help of the servants who work and run errands, there must be more than 10 people." Wang's mother stretched out her finger and calculated, the Marquis of Pan Mansion across the road is the younger brother of Empress Pan. When I was shopping on the street before, I heard their maid say that in the courtyards of the 3 side rooms of Pan Mansion, there is one mother, 2 big maids, and some other servants and maids responsible for miscellaneous affairs. So much. Changqiyuan was a little surprised. Her father was only in the 7th grade, and her mother only had 1 big maid and 2 small maids doing odd jobs by her side. She also had a small maid living in her own branch, 1 little maid on her aunt's side, and 1 servant on each of her 2 younger brothers. Changqiyuan sighed and looked at Wang's mother with a somewhat contemptuous gaze. She didn't care at all. In the Shadow Moon Tower, she didn't look at anything. Chapter 5. Banquet Family. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. That night, while Changqiyuan was listening attentively to Wang Mama's introduction of the people in the mansion, Lingyue came over. He seemed to be in a good mood and sat directly in the main seat, gently stroking Changqiyuan's hand and softly saying, "What are you talking about? Has Madam been here yet?" Changqiyuan nodded and gestured for Mrs. Wang to go out first, saying, "Mrs. Wang just taught me how to recognize people. Madam has come." In the evening, Yao Ji came directly with her maid and mother-in-law, and also gave away many precious jewelry. Changqiyuan felt in his heart that his wife did not welcome him as a concubine, but he also felt that he could not be picky and only truthfully described it to Lingyue. Lingyue nodded and said, "Madam knows etiquette. After all, Yao Mansion is a family of Zaifu, and she has probably been exposed to it since childhood." Changqiyuan nodded lightly and said, "I will definitely not cause trouble for Brother Yun." Lingyue coughed and glanced at the maid next to him, waving his hand and letting them go down. Pick up Changqiyuan and walk towards the inside. "My dear Guaner, when someone is around in the future, you should call me Marquis." Changqiyuan was buried on his shoulder, his face flushed, "Okay." After finishing work, Changqiyuan lay on his chest, his fingers gently tracing the lines of his muscles. "Brother Yun, where's Xiaowan from yesterday? I think we are very compatible. Our names also have the same pronunciation," he said. Lingyue pressed her small hand with her big hand, her voice a bit hoarse. "Tomorrow, I'll go to the study and take a look, and I'll share her with you for use." Changqiyuan lifted his head and happily pecked at his mouth. "Thank you, Brother Yun." Lingyue was in her prime, and she couldn't withstand her teasing. She immediately flipped over and pressed forward. Changqiyuan begged for mercy repeatedly, shouting, "Brother Yun, Brother Yun." Lingyue was more inspired and her movements became more powerful. The red candle was warm. Taking advantage of the candlelight, Changqiyuan caressed Lingyue's delicate stubble and thought to himself, "Brother Yun, I can rely on you in this mansion." Although Wang's mother is shrewd, she also tells Changqiyuan about the affairs of Xiaofu. When listening to Yushuan and Yao Ji's introduction, they did not mention that there lived Lingyue's sister, Lingyue. Wang's mother said that for some unknown reason, this young lady from the Marquis' mansion, who is now 18 years old, has not yet discussed marriage and is only accompanied by the maid Just Wang. In addition, only Lingyue was staying in the Yanho mansion. After leaving the gate of the Marquis' mansion, the courtyard on the right named Yan Mansion was occupied by Lingyue, the second son of the old Marquis, and his aunt. Although there aren't many people in the Yan family, I learned from Mrs. Wang that none of them are fuel-efficient lamps. Lingyue, although still young, is superior to Lingyue in terms of education. Now studying at the private school of the Jiang family in the capital city, Zhao's mother from the neighboring courtyard said that Gongzi will prepare for the imperial examination next year. Lingyue has a cold and stern personality, and has never said much. The old lady is very obedient to her, and her personal reasons are not very clear. Changqiyuan sighed lightly and turned over. In the future, in this mansion, she may not be able to rely solely on banquets with Lingyue. As the folk saying goes, to forge iron, one must be hard on oneself. Perhaps she should conceive a child as soon as possible. Suddenly, she thought of the story she had heard in the corridor during the day. Would a quick-witted housemaid be so prone to miscarriage? She saw Sister Yuelian having a miscarriage in Lingyue Tower. It doesn't seem so easy. Thinking of this, Changqiyuan felt childish. He needed to think more in the future. It would be even better if there were someone he could trust. Now, I wonder where the younger brothers are and whether they are still alive. According to the laws of this dynasty, they are most likely to be exiled to extremely cold places. They are not yet 10 years old, can they persist? The more Chun'er thought, the more his thoughts became chaotic. He flipped over again and accidentally hit Yan Lingyue's chest with his elbow. She quickly apologized and rubbed her hand. I'm sorry, Brother Yun. Her voice was warm and gentle, causing Yan Lingyue to close her eyes and grab her with a big hand, then directly embraced her. Chun'er's figure is exquisite and well developed, soft and pressed against Yan Lingyue's chest. Perhaps the grip was too tight, but Chun'er tried to adjust his position, using his left hip to support him, stepping on the bed with his right foot, bending his knee and moving back a bit. It seems like he hit something hard. Chun'er instantly realized what it was and immediately straightened his body, afraid to move. But it's already too late. The candlelight flickered, reflecting the sweat beads on Yan Lingyue's forehead, shining brightly. After finishing the task, Chun'er leaned against Yan Lingyue's chest and said softly, Brother Yun, help Chun'er prepare the avoiding soup. Yan Lingyue tightened her body and frowned, asking, why? Chun'er rubbed against his arms and said, Brother Yun is the head of the Banquet mansion, and the eldest son should be the legitimate heir. Yan Lingyue kissed her on the top of the head and said, Chun'er is thoughtful, but I will have to suffer you in the future. Chun'er's eyes were full of him, no pain. Chapter 6 Banquet Lingyue. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. The next morning, the sky was hazy and bright. Chun'er struggled to get up, but was directly grabbed by Yan Lingyue and said in a muffled voice, What are you doing up so early? Chun'er shrank into a ball and said, Brother Yun, there should be a maid coming in to serve you in changing clothes and mourning. I can't sleep anymore. Yan Lingyue refused and held on to Chun'er, saying, I won't speak, no one dares to come in. Good brother, I just entered the mansion and I have to go and greet my wife, he said, his arm forcefully breaking his big hand, but to no avail. I had no choice but to open my mouth and bite, hissing. Yan Lingyue let go and said softly, Are you a dog? Chun'er licked his face and smiled, I didn't dare to exert force. At the same time, he deliberately tapped his Adam's apple with his fingers, trying to ease his anger. Who would have thought it would arouse someone's interest again? Chun'er only felt a certain part of his body was hot and lazy to get up. Someone stood up on their own and gave her a sideways glance, meaning, Didn't you wake up? Yan Lingyue had just left, but Chun'er still forced himself to get up. Wang's mother had already entered through the door. Looking at Chun'er's shoulders and neck, she sighed lightly and said, Oh my, Marquis is also a bit reckless. Chun'er felt a little embarrassed and said shyly, Could you please ask Mom to find a high-necked shirt? This is not good for Madam to see. Wang's mother nodded repeatedly, Your master is thoughtful, I'll go find him now. By dawn, Chun'er had been waiting at Fang Ziju for half an hour. Wang's mother was somewhat dissatisfied and said, Why do you need to be like this in such a cold weather? Chun'er hissed and gestured for her not to speak. No matter whether Wang Mama really feels sorry for herself or deliberately says it, she doesn't want Yao Ji to hear it. Although she had never learned how to be a concubine, and her parents were still there before, and her mother only taught her how to be a wife, after reading those many notebooks, she felt that being polite was always right. When Fang Jiju's mother Qi came out to pour water, she seemed startled when she saw Chun'er. Not long after, Zhu Mama came out to welcome her, and Chun'er followed her into Fangji residence. Yao Ji sat in the main hall, while Chun'er knelt down and said, Greetings to Madam. Yao Ji, as usual, greeted each other with a smile. Sister, why are you suffering? It's such a cold day. Our Marquis' mansion has fewer people, so we don't follow these formalities. Chun'er lowered his head silently and only listened to Yao Ji's instructions, Qi Mama, help Aunt Ching up and sit down quickly. Qi's mother agreed and came to help Chun'er. Chun'er smiled gratefully at her. Yao Ji took a sip of tea and continued, "Sister, our Marquis' mansion has a small population, and the old lady likes to be quiet and never lets me go to greet her. Marquis only has you and me now, so these formalities will be waived in the future. If there are new people coming in the future, if there are no rules, we can do it no later. My sister comes from an official family, and she is different from them." Chun'er was taken aback in his heart, reminding himself that the favor of the Marquis was only temporary and should not be indulged. Chun'er felt that the chairs were not warm, so she immediately stood up and saluted, "Yes. I'll do whatever Madam arranges." After chatting a few more words, Yao Ji seemed tired and asked Chun'er to come back. Just as I entered the long corridor, I met Lingyue and her maid returning to the garden. Wang's mother whispered in her ear, "This is Mississippi." Chun'er quickly leaned back and said, "Sister and sister are doing well." Lingyue snorted coldly, "Are you newly recruited by Lingyue?" Chun'er felt a bit embarrassed and answered truthfully, "Yes." "Raise your head." Lingyue wore a green dress, clean and sharp, with a sharp gaze. Chun'er looked straight at Lingyue and heard her comment, "There's a bit of beauty." After speaking, he left first. Suddenly he turned around and said, "Are you from Nanching? It's very close to the grassland there." Chun'er didn't know why, so he answered honestly, "Yes. It's tens of miles away from the grassland." Lingyue's gaze seemed to soften a bit. "That's much closer than here," she said before brushing her sleeves and leaving. Chapter 7. Chun'er. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At noon, when Mrs. Wang returned to Shangqiyuan from outside, she was followed by Xiaowan bouncing around. Wang's mother scolded while walking, "Walk well." Xiaowan immediately calmed down. Chun'er was half lying on the lounge chair under the corridor, basking in the sun. The early spring sun was particularly bright, and the newly fallen peach blossom snow made her unable to open her eyes. Wang's mother lowered her head and shouted with a smile, "Master, this little girl you like has been brought over to you." Chun'er immediately stood up and covered the sun with his hands. Xiaowan knelt obediently, her head buried deep. "Go inside and talk." Wang's mother quickly supported Chun'er's arm and lifted the curtain to enter the room. Chun'er sees that Xiaowan has been trying to resist her greediness, and her eyes have been tilted to the dim sum on the table. She handed the food on the table to Xiaowan, who immediately took it and stuffed it into her mouth. Wang's mother was dissatisfied and said, "Why are there such no rules?" Chun'er smiled and said, "Mom doesn't need to scold her. When I was her age, I wasn't as good as her." Wang's mother immediately put her hands together and said, "My master, how can she compare with you?" "It's okay, Mom. Can you help me check if the fruit tea cooked on the small stove is ready? I'm not worried about those girls." Wang's mother immediately responded. She was proud in her heart. In the past, she used to do sweeping, which was dirty every day. Now that she still lives in the garden, every aspect of her work is inseparable from her new master. As for what the master wants to say to a little girl, she doesn't care. Chun'er asked Xiaowan to stand beside him, "How did you come to the Marquis' mansion?" "Returning to my master, my family can't support me anymore. That's why I entrusted Miss Wang, a servant. A few days ago, Mrs. Zhou in the mansion bought maids for the Marquis' mansion. Miss Wang saw that I looked clever, so she sold me to Mrs. Zhou." Xiaowan said truthfully. "Do you still have siblings?" "Yes, there are 2 younger sisters and 1 younger brother. I'm also new to this Marquis' mansion, and I'm not familiar with anything else. Would you be willing to be my companion?" Chun'er probed. Xiaowan was surprised. She had been in this mansion for a few days, and no one had ever spoken to her so well. They all complained about her lack of discipline and lack of propriety. She immediately knelt down and said, "From now on, Xiaowan will only obey the master's orders. Chun'er immediately helped her up and said, your name sounds the same as mine, it's fate, and it's not appropriate in this mansion. How about calling her Chun'er in the future? Let's enter this mansion together in spring, and spend spring, summer, autumn, and winter together, okay? Xiaowan was delighted and said in a crisp voice, okay. Chun'er pondered for a moment and said, if you take good care of your duties, I will find a good husband's family for you after reaching the age of G. Chun'er's face turned red and she reluctantly said, Lord. Son. Chun'er covered his face and smiled. As she was speaking, Mrs. Wang came in, carrying a plate of fruit tea. Master, this fruit tea is just right. Try it quickly. Have you divided all the girls? Chun'er took a sip. Divided, thanks to the master thinking about them. Otherwise, it would be cold enough for them on this day. The wrinkles on Wang's mother's face smiled. What good thing. Yao Ji's voice came from the door. Chun'er and Chun'er quickly knelt down and saluted. I've said it a few times, sister. There's no need for such a big gift between us, she said, looking at the tea on the table and curiously asking, what's this? Madam Hui, I grew up in Nanqing County when I was young. The climate there is dry and cold, and people often use some fruits to make tea to warm their bodies. Today, I have nothing to do, so I asked the maid to cook some with a small stove. If madam doesn't mind, you can also give it a try. Chun'er patiently explained. Oh. And this good thing. Bring it over quickly, let me try it. Yao Ji took a cup and took a gentle sip, savoring it carefully. This fruit tea is good. My younger sister will teach Kai Mama in the kitchen to make more and give it to the whole family to try. Yao Ji stroked Chun'er's hand, then, I'll work hard for my younger sister. Chun'er leaned back and said, it's only right to be able to do things for the government. She tilted Chun'er behind Chun'er and said, who is this girl? Chun'er turned sideways and gestured for Chun'er to kneel down. Madam Hui, her name is Chun'er. She's new to the mansion and was rewarded by the Marquis the day before yesterday. Yao Ji made a sudden realization and said, oh, look at my memory. There are various matters in the mansion. A few days ago, I instructed Zhou Mama to buy some more girls to come in, but I forgot. Goodbye madam, Chun'er said loudly. Little hoof, why are you so loud? Chi's mother scolded behind Yao Ji. Chun'er immediately begged for mercy, I know my mistake. Yao Ji frowned and said, I was really scared. Sister, how about letting this little girl kneel outside the hospital for half an hour? Chun'er immediately knelt down and said, it's because I didn't discipline myself well. I'm willing to be punished for Chun'er. My younger sister is becoming more and more unruly. If a girl makes a mistake, she will naturally be punished. What is it related to my younger sister? Get up quickly. Yao Ji raised her eyebrows and gestured for Chi's mother to drag Chun'er out of the room. Chun'er stood up helplessly, the sunlight shining through the window pane, especially dazzling. Peach blossom snow has just passed, and there is still a thin layer of snow on the ground. Chun'er is afraid that she will be frostbitten. Yao Ji sat and drank some children's tea again, instructing Chi Mama to bring the tailor outside the courtyard into the house and measure Chun'er's measurements. She said that she would be the aunt of the Marquis' mansion in the future and that she would need to prepare more clothes. Chun'er's gratitude is beyond words. Chapter 8. Snowy Battle. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the evening, Chun'er came to the maid's room, brought frostbite ointment, and tenderly applied medicine to Chun'er's knee. Chun'er, after all, was still young and immediately burst into tears. Master, I didn't mean to, she said reluctantly. Chun'er lowered his head but remained silent, quietly finishing his medicine. After wiping it off, he looked out the window at the white snow on the willow branches and sighed, Chun'er, such things may not happen again in the future. Are you afraid? Chun'er didn't understand and shook her head. You and I are both newcomers in this mansion, without a foundation. They may say or do wrong things at any time, followed by unpredictable punishment. If you are afraid, I can try my best to ask the Marquis to let you out of the mansion. Changguan's eyes were sincere. Chun'er wiped her tears and said, Master, I won't leave. You are the first person in this mansion who treats me well, and I will follow you for the rest of my life. Changguan held Chun'er tightly in both hands, and for a moment, wiped away her tears. Chun'er, I will do my best to protect you from now on, just hoping to have a companion in this mansion. Chun'er stood up and wanted to kneel down, but was stopped by Changguan, instructing her to rest well and not to go to the main house to serve her today. Changguan stood under the corridor, rubbing his bright red hands as he watched the growing snowflakes fall one after another. Wang's mother's voice came, Master, come in quickly. The snow is getting bigger and bigger. Changguan's frozen cheeks turned red, and he blew his breath towards both hands with a playful smile. It's been a long time since there was such a big peach blossom snow, I want to see it for a while. Okay, I'll get you another cloak, old servant. Mrs. Wang hurriedly entered the room. Changguan put on his cloak and suddenly had the idea of playing with snow. She walked alone into the snow, lifted her face, extended her pink tongue, and the snowflakes landed on it, cool. She quickly retracted her tongue, reached out her hand, and her palm was soon filled with droplets of water. She squatted down, vigorously rounded a snowball, bent over, and kept rolling the snowball, getting bigger and bigger. Her small hands turned red from the cold, but she felt a warm heart. As long as she worked hard, she believed that the future would be beautiful. She carefully organized the snowballs, and a thick layer of snow fell on her cloak. From a distance, her small figure was in a vast expanse of white. When Lingyue came over, he saw such a scene. He chuckled, Why don't you cover your master with an umbrella? Wang's mother immediately knelt down. Changguan turned her head and lifted her pink lips lightly. Marquis, don't blame them. It's me who wants to play with the snow. After speaking, she twisted the snow in her hand into a ball and threw it directly in front of Lingyue. Unexpectedly, Lingyue had been practicing martial arts since childhood and reached out to catch it, with a smile on his face. Changguan deliberately pouted, It's not fun, Marquis knows martial arts. Lingyue laughed heartily and strode over, holding her in his arms. Do you still want to have a snowball fight with me? Yeah. She said, biting her lips tightly, appearing particularly romantic. Lingyue tightened her heart and held onto her neck, kissing her lips. Changguan pushed him hard, but he refused to let go. She had a sudden idea and stuffed the small snowball in her hand into his collar. Lingyue immediately let go and said, Cluck. Changguan looked at Lingyue's lowered head and clear snow, and smiled as he bent over. Before she could stand up straight, suddenly her feet took off and Lingyue hugged her horizontally, walking towards the room. Little rascal. Lingyue waved his hands, the door closed tightly, and the pink tent fell. Brother Yun, it's not dark yet. Lingyue kissed her directly and blocked her. Chapter 9. Consort. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The snowflakes fell intermittently for several days, and finally cleared up today. With nothing to do, Changguan and the girls cleared the snow in the yard together. Stacking with a wooden shovel bit by bit, Changguan felt very healed in his heart. Everything in this mansion is unknown, and things that can be seen with results make her feel at ease. Looking at Chun'er's hard work in shoveling snow, Changguan reminded, Chun'er, your frostbite is not good. You can go back to the house and rest. Chun'er touched the fine sweat on her forehead and said, I'm not tired. The lock next to her chuckled, Master, Chun'er's sister is grateful for the medicine you gave her. Changguan smiled and said, Since you are in Shangqiyuan, if something happens, I will never ignore it. This lock is the youngest and has a simple mind. Changqiyuan looked at them and felt that everything was very hopeful, and it would definitely get better and better in the future. Thinking this way, Changqiyuan became even more powerful. Outside the courtyard, an emerald green figure ran away. Feng Ji sat inside, the piercing sound of broken dishes. Qi's mother breathed a sigh of relief on Yao Ji's chest while instructing the girl kneeling on the ground, Sueji, you go down first. After that, she poured another cup of tea for Yao Ji and patiently said, Madam, you need to calm down. Yao Ji raised her eyebrows and said angrily, I was planning to give her some leverage, but I didn't expect to let her have a confidant. Qi's mother smiled and said, where did this come from? That little girl was given a free reward by the Marquis, a rootless little hoof. Madam doesn't need to care. Yao Ji took a sip of tea, looked up at Qi Mama, sighed, and said, Qi Mama, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't know how to cook in this whole mansion. Qi's mother crouched down and said, the old slave has been in the Yao mansion for 20 years. He was born into the Yao mansion and died into the Yao mansion's ghost. Miss, don't say anything out of touch. The old slave will be the girl's eyes, ears, and arms, all driven by the girl. Yao Ji was moved and even lay on her shoulder, crying. Qi's mother comforted, the girl's heart is bitter, and the old servant knows. Yao Ji wiped her tears and sighed, yes, that green lotus used to rely on being before me for being unreasonable multiple times. Finally, she died, and now Changqiyuan has come again. Qi's mother quickly covered her mouth and went to the door to visit. The servants were all busy, and no one paid attention to the conversation inside the room. Madam, don't bring up the matter of the green lotus again. As for Changqiyuan, she is currently the one with the Marquis' sharp heart. We need to consider it in the long run. Qi's mother pondered for a moment and comforted Yao Ji. Yao Ji stood up, feeling a bit angry and frustrated. One after another, why are there so many things? Qi's mother quickly helped her walk into the room and said, Madam, take a rest and take good care of yourself. It's important to be pregnant. Let me think about it carefully. Yao Ji sat on the edge of the bed, twisting her handkerchief tightly with her hands and furrowing her willow eyebrows. It's been a long time since we got married, why haven't we been pregnant yet? Even the previous green lotus can get pregnant, why can't I? Qi's mother comforted, Madam, don't worry. You're still young. Choose a day and we'll go back to the Prime Minister's mansion. Please help me. Well, that slut is quite witty and even took the initiative to ask the Marquis to avoid Zitang. Yao Ji lay down gently. She knows how much she weighs, so madam, don't worry. Qi's mother tucked in Yao Ji's blanket. Yao Ji slept very restlessly this night. She dreamed that when the old Marquis passed away, she came to Yan Mansion with her parents for the first time and saw him for the first time. Yan Lingyue, who was tall, dressed in white clothes, and had a pale face, which immediately moved her heart. When she returned to pay her respects, she often looked out the window and was discovered by Qi's mother. After several inquiries, she showed a shy expression and expressed her daughter's thoughts. Qi's mother immediately reported to her mother, who nodded at her head and said, My dear, this time she has been really thoughtful, hasn't she? She blushed and dared not look up. My mother smiled and said, I didn't expect that my eldest daughter, Zhi'er, usually has a strong aura, but now she is like this. She tugged at her mother's sleeve and said, Mother. All right, Mom knows. After more than a month, her father came into the room and sighed, this kid insists on being a filial servant for the old Banquet Marquis for 3 years. Our Dayu dynasty has no such rules. She was even more convinced that she would not marry unless she had a banquet in Lingyue for this lifetime. Holding his father's arm, this shows that he is a kind-hearted and righteous good man. Father shook his head and said, No, I have asked someone for my father's advice. This kid was reckless a few years ago and was abandoned by the old Banquet Marquis in Nanqing County, following Qingqiji for training. What's going on? Who is Qingqiji? She was puzzled. Changqiyuan is the county magistrate of Nanqing County. Nanqing is a barbarian, and he came from a literati background. He established a school in the local area. When the old Marquis of Yan took Yan Lingyue on a trip to the border, he appreciated him a lot, so he left his son in Nanqing as a trainee. I have sent a scout to see if Yan Lingyue is indulging in promiscuity there. Father stroked his beard. Later on, my father's scout came to report that Changqiyuan had a daughter who was 12 years old and had a beautiful country. She smashed all the porcelain in the room and lay on the bedside, crying bitterly. Madam, madam. Yao Ji was awakened by Chi's mother's shaking, tears hanging from the corners of her eyes. Madam, did you have a dream? The Marquis has come over. Yao Ji quickly stood up and instructed Chi's mother to tidy up her makeup. Chapter 10. Distinguishing between master and child. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Yao Ji had just finished her makeup when Yan Lingyue walked in and looked at her, praising her. You are truly my wife, dignified and generous. Thank you, Marquis, for your praise, Yao Ji said, bowing her head and knees. Yan Lingyue sat at the table, gesturing for her to sit down together. Chi's mother poured tea for Yan Lingyue and voluntarily withdrew. Yan Lingyue stroked her hand and whispered, recently, you have been very considerate of Chang's entry into the mansion. It is about March 3rd, and my mother and I have mentioned that we plan to hold a family banquet after ancestor worship. When the time comes, we will invite the neighboring aunt and Ling Qi to come over and have a lively time. How about you come and organize it? Yao Ji planned to get up and take a step, but accidentally stepped on the hem of her skirt. As she was about to fall, she was grabbed by Yan Lingyue's big hand and leaned against his chest. Yao Ji felt a bit embarrassed. It must have been when she woke up just now that her clothes were loose and she didn't notice it in time. At this moment, the crispy chest was slightly exposed, and Yao Ji felt a burning sensation on her cheeks, with a crimson hue spreading throughout her neck. Yao Ji suddenly remembered the secret techniques her mother had taught her before marriage. During these days after marriage, she only remembered being dignified and forgot that Marquis was not only Marquis, but also her husband. With tears in her eyes, she imitated her mother's words and looked up at Yan Lingyue. Her pink lips lifted lightly and she said, Marquis, Chun'er is impolite. Yan Lingyue's heart was moved. Although he and Yao Ji had only been married for a year, they seemed like an old husband and wife, with little interest in each other. At this moment, as he watched her sew and sew, his body immediately reacted. He untied her belt, kissed her tender shoulder, and covered her soft with the other hand. Yao Ji felt as if she had been cast a spell, numb all over, and unconsciously moaned. Yan Lingyue undressed her and carried her into the bed tent. After finishing the task, Yao Ji held Yan Lingyue's neck and sweetly said, Did Chun'er delay the Marquis' business? Yan Lingyue touched her small face with his hand and whispered in her ear, This is also a matter of business. Yao Ji hid in his arms and whispered, Marquis, don't joke with Chun'er. Yan Lingyue laughed heartily. At night, Yan Lingyue had planned to stay overnight at Fangji's residence when he suddenly heard from the housekeeper Zhou, someone has arrived in the palace. Yao Ji tidied up the clothes for Yan Lingyue and said, Marquis, hurry up. As soon as Yan Lingyue left, Zhou Mama came to report, Madam, old lady, please come. Yao Ji was suddenly displeased. This Zhou Mama was simply the old lady's messenger, and even if there was any movement in Fangjichu, she would report it to the old lady every minute. Zhou Mama, distinguish who your master is. Yao Ji exclaimed sternly. She gave Chi Mama a wink and she took out a stack of suicide deeds from inside. Here are the sales contracts for your 2 sons and 1 daughter. How long have you seen them? Don't worry, they are still doing a good job as farmers, but you may not know yet. Their current contracts are all with me. Mon Zhu had a frightened expression on her face and knelt down on the ground. I don't have any grudges against the old lady, but I don't like it. You take out any gossip about Fang Ziju. If you can control your mouth, your son and daughter will be safe and sound, Yao Ji shouted. Yes. Yes. Madam. Zhu's mother trembled and said. The old lady is old, and she doesn't need to know everything about the big and small affairs in this mansion. Originally, when the old lord was here, she didn't take care of the affairs in the mansion very much. Zhu's mother was greatly shocked as she listened to the words of this legitimate wife. She knew so much at such a young age. Originally, when the old Marquis was around, Song Rushuang, who was also the aunt of the second prince, was taking care of the family affairs. The old lady had a hot personality, which did not please the old Marquis, making the young Marquis unruly and difficult to discipline. This led to 2 years of experience in the southern city. Mom Zhu wiped the sweat off her forehead and said in a trembling voice, "Old slave, in the future, Lady Dingwei will lead the way." Yao Ji gave a wink, and then Chi Mama stepped forward to help her. "Zhu Mama, we are of similar age. We will grow up in this mansion in the future. Let's serve Madam well together," she said. Zhu's mother repeatedly responded.